I am very much looking forward to this conversation with Lewis Harrison, who is one of the more interesting and versatile thinkers that I've had the privilege to meet over the years. He's probably one of the leading experts, if not the leading expert in game theory, and is really working on some very, very interesting questions and very interesting approaches to some of the world's most interesting problems. So with that, I'll say I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to every bit of it. Could you give us a little bit of an overview, or give me a little bit of an overview of kind of what game theory is?
Game theory is a concept that was developed in its modern form by a visionary thinker named John von Neumann. And he was a mentor to Richard Feynman and Robert Oppenheimer and the whole bunch that invented the atom bomb. And he was at Los Alamos watching poker games and realized he was a great poker player. And he realized that in human interactions, there's nothing you really can do, being that humans are social animals, without having been influenced by both the environment and other players. So that when you're looking to maximize your potential at the lowest possible cost, win, so to speak, in a game, that you cannot do that in isolation. That you need to have a sense of what the other players are going to do, what their strategies are they cheaters, are they liars, are they, what are they going to do? And that what they're going to do initially does define how you're going to play the game and how you're going to strategize. So it's how people strategize in their lives based on what others are likely to do.
Is there a distinction between game theory and manipulation?
Well, everything in life is manipulated. If you're a social creature, then you're looking to maximize your potential. And if you're in a hostile environment, well, how can you prosper without manipulating your environment? So manipulation is not a bad term.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's interesting. Let me ask you this, Lewis. If you were to apply what you're doing in your work to some of the more serious problems on the planet,
yes,
whether it's climate change, politics,
sure,
or
sure,
social injustice, how would you connect the dots in terms of those relationships?
You actually connected. That's only you said it because one of the books in my series is called Connecting the Dots. What happens is people have perceptions of what their realities are, but those are usually inaccurate. They have cognitive bias, confirmation bias, and information bias. They convince themselves that they're right. They surround themselves with people that convince them that they're right, and then they get mathematics to convince themselves that they're right. So you have to be able to influence the influencers. Mm-hmm. So one of the flaws in game theory, by the way, I'm really involved in applied game theory because Nobel Prize winners write game theory, and I'm just a humble person manipulating Nobel Prize winners. But what happens is that once you understand what another player is likely to do, you need to find out who the influencer is in that game. And then by influencing the influencer, you then create a ripple effect. So what happens is if you're trying to get someone to do what they don't want to do, they're just not going to do it. But if you can show them the benefit to them in doing it in a selfish way, they'll get richer, they'll have more power, more whatever, then they probably will do what you want. And if you're really skilled, you can make them think it's their idea and stay anonymous. Because the biggest person is the one who gets the bullet. I mean, nothing negative, but it's if you're the big chief, you're the one that they're going to get. Mm-hmm. So you really want to be the person in the smoke film room telling the chief what to do.
So if you were going to, say, work with the White House,
yes,
to become a little more...
I'm going to drop something on you that you never saw coming.
All right.
Okay. So I would find out what Rebecca Mercer wants. Now, I don't know if you know who Rebecca Mercer is. Rebecca Mercer is one of the wealthiest women in the world, and she was Ted Cruz's boss, essentially, and she's Steve Bannon's boss, and she's the major funder behind Breitbart. And her father is the man who developed all the algorithms that we all use when we go on Google and Amazon. And he's a right-wing guy.
So she's a super influencer.
Oh, she's a big time. And she's such an influencer that when she threw Ted out of the boat, she went and made Donald Trump her employee, essentially, and said to him, "You're putting Steve Bannon in the White House staff."
Wow.
So this is the kind of stuff I love.
So you're right. I did not see that one.
So what happens is most people. I'm talking about me and game theory without arrogance. It may sound a little arrogant, but it's not meant to be. The more information you have, the more influence you have. The more you can connect the dots of information, the more you can manipulate and influence decision makers. Because they just have the small picture, you have the big picture.
Let me ask you this. So one of my main themes has been this a notion of we live in a real-time world.
Yes.
That the gap between the future and the past is disappearing.
It's disappeared.
And
Oh, longer.
It's
It's disappeared.
so that we can no longer trust the past to inform what we're going to do in the future.
That's right. And Lincoln didn't free the slaves, by the way, only in the southern states. There were 2 northern states that had slavery to the end of the Civil War, but they were against secession. That's about connecting the dots, historically even.
Well, let me ask you this. What should be the plan for dealing with the next 5 years? Because
The game plan is a fairly simple one. While everybody's doing Black Lives Matter and Occupy Wall Street, you need to find out how to get to Rebecca Mercer and convince her it's her best interest not to support white supremacists. And the way that gets done, by the way, is her father just quit his job as chairman of the board of his company because their stock dropped by 20% because stockholders that didn't want to be associated with a guy who's a white supremacist pulled their money out of all the industrial stocks.
where do you get the information that you
Wikipedia.
This is Wikipedia.
No, my wife, I mean, I was very white, but you have to look. If you're, I'm being serious now. If you're a conservative, like a right-wing conservative, you need to be reading the Brookings Institute, watching MSNBC, watching Rachel Maddow. If you're a so-called progressive liberal, you need to be reading Cato Institute. You need to be going to the Hoover Institute. You need to be listening to Glenn Beck. Because if you're in a confirmation bias that you know you're right,
That's really
you don't
cool.
understand the other point of view.
No, that's brilliant.
I could be a better right-winger than a right-winger can be.
I mean, I love this because I wrote a blog once called The Lebanization of America,
Yes.
where we're sort of living in silos. Everybody's watching their own television. And I'm guilty of this myself sometimes. I'm talking to other progressives
Yes.
rather than really interacting.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this. So how do you see the forum or the environment or the structure within which to have a sensible dialogue or connect
The way it would work is
face-to-face connection?
it would
'Cause
happen.
let me give you a truth. I have difficulty having conversations around politics with members of my family,
Right.
simply because it gets emotional and gets positional, and then nobody's trusting their sources of information of the other. And it becomes essentially a walk on eggshells, avoid the
It
conversation.
doesn't have to be.
So tell me about how could we fix that problem in America?
Let's say your cousin Charlie is a right-wing Nazi racist.
Good.
Let's say.
Okay, let's say.
Right. So I say to Charlie, you believe that white supremacy, define white. Are Italians white? How about people in Malta who look like they're Arab? Are they white? See, if you ask people who are lazy, I'm being careful now, lazy thinkers, uncritical thinkers, and people feeling confirmation bias, all you need to do to pull the legs out from under them is say that you think the same way they do. Now you're a reactionary, you're right wing, you're not a racist or a Nazi, but you're right wing. Defend your position, ask them a question. So let's say guns. Let's take a situation like guns. So someone says, I'm against guns. I say, well, how would you keep illegal people from getting guns? Well, you can't. But so bad people have guns and good people don't. I never thought of that before. So what happens, people have a point of view. They're pro-gun, they're anti-gun. But if you ask them questions about why they have the position they have, you're going to find they're usually lazy or stupid, or they're very, very articulate about their position, and they may change your mind.
So if you then go one notch further, so I can understand it in a rational context, at
Yes.
least what you're saying makes sense. Now, if you then say, but many of these points of view have become institutionalized,
Yes.
or they're no longer necessarily belong to the individual thinker, whether it's because
Yes.
they're lazy or because they're just not critically
Yeah.
thinking.
Yes.
So the individuals can all agree, and it not change the reality.
No, you game the system.
So now let's talk about gaming the system.
Yeah, you figure out how the system works, and then you game it. You call the person who used to do enforcement for the IRS and say, I don't want to pay taxes. How do I avoid paying taxes? And he says, form a sub-corporation, set up in Northern Ireland, and then have a sub-corporation in Turks and Caicos. You don't pay any taxes. So any problem, the thing about game-based thinking is any problem that's ever existed, that's been solved at least once, could be mapped and solved a second time.
So let's take on a couple of problems.
Anyone you want.
And let's just see. So let's take on climate change.
Yeah.
So how are you going to use game theory to turn around the practices that are producing.
You can't do it philosophically. You have to convince someone that they lose money. You have to convince Rebecca Mercer to talk to Elon Musk and talk to the 1/10 of 1%ers, not the 1%ers. Those are small players. The guy that's worth $200 million, $500, lightweight. Get someone that's worth $740 billion, and convince that person that it doesn't serve their. I'm going to go off climate change for a second, if I may. I'm not going.
Yep.
Convince them it doesn't support them to sell weapons to ISIL. And when you convince them it doesn't serve their economic interest to do that, then they support the Turks in going in. It's all economics and territory.
So many of these, the example you just used is pretty self-evident, I would think, to anybody that
Yes.
has any size bankroll, that it's not in their self-interest to do that, because
Right.
you're actually a gun merchant.
It's all in the world. Even if you're a tree hugger, and I am in my heart of hearts a tree hugger, not in reality, but in my heart of hearts I am. Life is about territory. It's about territory, and about ego. So if I can convince you that you get more territory and your ego gets stroked by ending rape, burning, pillaging, climate melting, then you'll just take your money and direct it to saving the Arctic. And not allow oil drilling in Antarctica, because it's in your interest to do that.
Louis, let me ask you this. In terms of just the man on the street, in
Yeah.
terms of the ordinary guy, he's unemployed, or he's getting divorced, or he's
Yeah.
unhappy, or he's trying to
Yeah.
make a buck, or just tell me how this all comes down.
Look, America's great. This is what you can do in America. You can volunteer, kind of who the richest guy in your town is, and volunteer to work at his fundraiser, and then work the room. So one thing you can do is influence, power, information, and access. You have to have clarity of thought, emotional balance, and a sense of vision. And if you could put those together with the least amount of discipline, really the least amount of discipline, then you could simply maximize your potential at the lowest possible cost to become economically independent and fulfill all your vision and all your dreams. And I'm not just being fluffy-duffy. This is for real. Like, anybody watching this can literally go to the paper, look at the philanthropy section of the paper or the fundraiser or whatever, and just volunteer. But if you don't even have information, you can't do that. Because if I'm in a party, and I'm talking to someone who knows who Stanislavski is, then I know that Chekhov was an associate of Stanislavski in creating original method back in Russia. But if you don't know that, then you can't talk to someone about what you have to connect to people at their level. You have to have rapport with someone else. It's always about us. You have to get out of yourself, create rapport with somebody else so that you're connecting to what's important to them. And if you do that, they will open every door in the world for you. They have to, because we're social animals.
Well, that resonates with me. I mean, one of my current themes is that we're in a kind of historical evolutionary time where we're moving from an era of production and control to an era of care. And I'm thinking that without that ability to move your attention from yourself to others, we're pretty much going to keep producing more of the same.
I know, I want to jump off of that. And if you're with someone who's an evil bastard, okay, if you're a good enough influence, you can get them to think you're being an evil, selfish bastard, and they're actually caring and making a difference in the world, and don't even know that they're doing it.
Well, that's worthy of several interviews
Yes,
or
it is.
conversations.
And that's game theory. That's gaming their evil for the purpose of good.
I do understand what you're saying. Well, we'll pursue that another time.
Okay.
But give me just a couple of hits in terms of how has this all come down in your own life?
I don't have a job. I live in a 22-room mansion. I have a great wife, and I never cheat on her, and she says I can do whatever I want, but I only want to be with her because I game the world enough to get the greatest wife in the world. And I cook for her, and that's pretty much it. And I spend the rest of my time having someone like Phyllis say, hey, want to come to Jersey? And get in a car and drive for 4 hours because I got nothing else to do except be with people I love.
Sounds like a winning formula.
It sure
Thank you
is.
very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. To create a possible future.